it was almost like you were reading Acts 2, but you were watching Acts 2 in real time there in South Korea. And I remember being flooded by this sense of, oh, Lord, be a part of what you're doing in this world, to be a part of your church, to serve your church. That's what I want to do with my life.
From Christianity Today, you're listening to The Bulletin, a podcast about the people, events, and issues that are shaping our world. I'm Clarissa Mall, producer and moderator of The Bulletin. Every 4 years, the world pauses for the Olympic Games. In the midst of war, global unrest, natural disaster, cultural tensions, the Olympics are meant to symbolize the best of us. Camaraderie across differences, healthy competition, and the celebration of success built on values like integrity, discipline, and persistence. Over the last couple of weeks, I've sat down with Olympic athletes to talk about their experiences, the joys and struggles that come with intense training and competition, and the lives we all live beyond the external things that tend to define us. Today on the show, I talk with Olympic gymnast Brody Malone, former gold medalist swimmer Missy Franklin, and Olympic decathlete and president of Compassion International, Jimmy Mellado. I hope their stories and our conversation encourage you as you too run the race that's been set before you. Welcome to The Bulletin. Artistic gymnastics is one of the most followed sports in the Summer Olympics every 4 years. In 2021, it ranked as the top Olympic sport watched by American fans, and the NBC televised Team USA trials this year drew over 8 million viewers. It's not cliche to say that when you're executing your back handspring or balancing on that beam 4 feet in the air, all eyes are watching you. But the life of an Olympic athlete is certainly far more than those moments in the spotlight. Behind each floor exercise is a person who has experienced not just the highs and lows of sport, but the joys and sufferings of life itself. Today, we're sitting down with Olympic gymnast Brody Malone to talk about just that. Brody represented the United States at the 2020 and 2024 Summer Olympics and is a 3-time United States national all-around champion. 2021, 2022, and this year, 2024. Joining us for the conversation is CT's president and CEO, Tim Dalrymple, himself a former gymnast. Brody, Tim, welcome to The Bulletin.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Brody, I'm curious, most professional gymnasts, they begin training at like ages 3, 4, 5 with the expectation that by ages 6 to 8, they're going to be competing. Could you take me back? Who was 10-year-old Brody Malone?
I actually started gymnastics when I was 3. I was one of those kids with a lot of energy, and my parents just kind of wanted to get it out of me. So they're like, okay, we'll put you in a safe place instead of you doing, backflips on the couch. But yeah, my first competition, I believe, was on my 7th birthday. I remember it because the lady that sang the national anthem sang happy birthday to me. So yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Well, you grew up in a rodeo family, right?
Yeah, my dad rodeoed in college and my mom rode equestrian. So I've always been a part of a horse family. So, ever since I was little, I've been on a horse. My dad taught all my siblings and I had a rope when we were really young and just kind of did it growing up as a family thing. My event was team roping. So, you've got like a live steer and then you're on a horse, and it's like not just you, you also have a partner who's also on a horse. So I definitely got some of that learning how to compete when I was young in rodeo, and it definitely transferred to gymnastics. But as far as anything else, they're pretty different.
Well, when I learned that your mom had died of cancer in 2012, I kind of stopped short because my husband died 5 years ago when my son was 12. And so I know what it's like to watch a child experience a deep loss like that. Certainly experiencing loss at any age shapes a person. But in the midst of this rodeo life, in the midst of a growing interest in gymnastics, you experienced a major life change as you're trying to be normal, trying to do your gymnastics training, as you're trying to go to school. How did that loss change shape in your life over time?
Yeah, like you said, I was 12 when my mom passed away. I mean, do you really ever know how to handle emotions like that when you're 12 years old? I mean, it was definitely hard on me, but my thing was I leaned to my dad. I'm the oldest sibling in my family. I have two younger brothers and a younger sister. So I looked to him for my support. He was my role model in how to handle things. And I took it upon myself to step up and try to be a role model, like a figure for my younger siblings and grow up and mature at 12 years old. It's a hard thing to lose a parent, but I would say my dad leaned a lot on God in that time, and it was very obvious. So just seeing that as an example was very good for me in my faith. And then also, I would say I used gymnastics as kind of, I don't want to say like an escape, but as like I would put all of my mental energy towards gymnastics. I mean, I guess it kind of was my escape from things. So, I mean, I would just put all my, work ethic and time and energy into gymnastics.
Well, I think that's really good for listeners to hear because children need that. They need that so much. A course that allows them to walk forward after they have experienced something big and hard like that. And as adults, we look at it and we say, oh, well, maybe that person's becoming consumed by their work. But children, like you say, they experience their loss differently. And so to have something like gymnastics that was stable in your life, to have a parent who would be a role model to you, that's a real stabilizing force in the midst of a lot of change for you.
Our approach was very much, yeah, this happened and it was terrible, but life goes on. Like, yeah, you can miss her. And I mean, I miss her every day. I think about her every day. But I mean, life goes on and I know she's in heaven and I'll see her again one day. And that keeps me going for sure.
Tim, you experienced loss in your own Olympic journey when an injury cut your time in sport short. How did life go on for you?
So I was a Stanford gymnast, and we did win the NCAAs my freshman year. And I know you guys, man, they've just won so many championships in recent years, and you were a part of that. But yeah, my career ended in a broken neck my sophomore year, and it was a couple months before the Olympic trials. When you're growing up in gymnastics, there is such a focus on the Olympics, right? That's the one time when the attention of the entire world focuses on the sport of men's gymnastics. So I think if you were like me, you just dreamt about the Olympics every night. You envisioned what it would be like. And it's part of what keeps you going and day in and day out. And eventually you learn, right, that it's less about the destination than it is about the journey. And for myself, I didn't have the destination. That was like cut off at the last second. But the journey was just incredibly, incredibly valuable. And I'm so grateful for it.
So when I made the Tokyo team, I was so happy. I had achieved my lifelong goal, but there was something missing. It just wasn't everything I had hoped it had been. And then I ended up not winning a medal there. And then moving on to my 2021 World Championships, the couple months after the Olympics, when I won my bronze medal on high bar. Of course, I was happy, but I was still empty inside. I remember talking to my dad about it, and he was like, "You're not going to find fulfillment in all these accomplishments and all these medals." That is something that the past few years, like, that's the greatest thing that I have learned from the sport. I've worked so hard all these years, but at the end of the day, it's a piece of metal. I'm going to take it home. I'm going to hang it up in my room. It's probably going to be rusted in a few years. So for me, that was a big realization. You can't find your fulfillment and your success as an individual. You can only find fulfillment in Christ. I mean, these medals and everything will pass away, but there's one thing that never passes away, and that's Jesus. That's God. Yeah. So that has been my biggest realization going through sports.
How do you get into a headspace that isn't despairing on a day where practice just doesn't turn out the way you hoped it would?
Today, I was just reminding myself that it's part of the process to get back into shape and to be prepared to compete in Paris. After Olympic trials, we took a little bit of a dip in our training plan we just built some recovery into the training cycle. So for Olympic trials, we were here and then we dipped down for like a week and a half, and then we're slowly ramping back up. So that way we'll be in peak performance by the time we get to Paris.
Is there a burden to having to be the comeback kid? I mean, you have a little bit of that story behind you in the media right now. He's coming back from injury. This is going to be his year. Do you feel a burden there?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a burden. I mean, it's just gymnastics. It's the same stuff I've been doing. I just dealt with a really, really bad injury.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'm at peace with my injury. I think just going back to my injury, like as soon as it happened, I was feeling a lot of emotions. Obviously, I was like, well, the first one was pain. It hurt pretty good. But I mean, I was angry. I was upset. I was mad. I was like, why? Why would this happen? Because it was a fluke accident. There was nothing that I did wrong. My hand just slipped off the bar. But I remember thinking, all right, God, I don't know why you did this. And I know it sucks right now. And it's probably going to suck for most of this recovery process. But I know you've got a plan. And as soon as that thought came to my mind, I just felt at peace about what had happened. Obviously, I knew that there was going to be struggles and hardships and pain moving forward, but I'm not upset that it happened anymore because I knew that God was going to use this as a way for me to spread his message. And I mean, if you've seen a lot of our competitions and stuff, I've had the opportunity to give God the glory for all of this.
What are your hopes for this Olympics?
My number one goal is to get on the podium as a team. And I think we're looking very good to do that. I mean, we still have to go do our job and do good gymnastics, but I think we're in a good spot. And then as far as individual goals, I mean, I would like to win a high bar medal. That would be awesome. I kind of missed out on it in Tokyo. I ended up having a small mistake that cost me probably a silver. So want to redeem myself a little bit. We used to always play it super safe, hit the super clean routines that might not be the most difficult, but that is kind of why we didn't medal. So to be with those top teams are doing really hard gymnastics and they're doing it really well also. So they were just ahead of us. So in order to close that difficulty gap, we did a lot of things. It was a big push in our national team and we've done a phenomenal job. So, and the emphasis was on the first year after Tokyo. If we just work on getting all of the difficulty in now, we'll have 2.5, 3 years to train it, to perfect it, basically, to get on the same execution level as those top teams. And that's what we've done.
It's so great to talk to you, to learn more about your life behind sport and within sport. Brody, thanks so much for joining us today. Tim, thanks for joining us. We will be right back. The average age of an Olympian is 27 years old, which means that once an athlete's career is over, he or she has a lot more life left to live. For many athletes, finding a place of belonging after sport can be really difficult. Success in sport came with clear and measurable goals, but success in everyday life is rarely evaluated in the same way. Fears and insecurities that sports help to address and redefine can creep in, leaving athletes wondering who they are without what they perform. One athlete who has made this transition to life after sport is Olympic medalist Missy Franklin. Missy Franklin is a 5-time Olympic medalist and a retired competitive swimmer. She has won 28 medals in international competition. Missy, welcome to the Bulletin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Missy, you began swimming at a really young age, but even before your feet sort of touched the water, it sounds like it was really important for you in your family to learn how to swim. I read that your mom was concerned about you drowning as a child. Was this just a sort of average mom fear of a little kid getting hurt, or was there something deeper that kind of drove her interest in getting you into the pool?
No, there was something a little deeper for sure. So I am actually a Canadian citizen as well. Both of my parents were born and raised in Canada. My mom grew up in Nova Scotia, which is very, very far east. And she didn't have a lot of access to water, to pools. She never really learned how to swim. And so I think it's always possible to learn how to swim no matter where you are at your life. But there is something that when you're younger, it kind of eases that fear, I think, a little bit when you're exposed to it at that early age. And my mom didn't have that exposure. So she always carries this fear around the water. Even to this day, if she can touch the bottom, she's okay. But anything deeper than that, and you can really tell it starts to get to her. And she just didn't want to pass that on to me. And I'm so grateful for that because I do a ton of work now with the USA Swimming Foundation around drowning prevention and the importance of swim lessons and learning how to swim. And we've done studies that show that if the parents don't know how to swim, there's less than a 20% chance that the children will know how to swim. So it is truly a generational fear that gets passed down. And my mom took me to a mommy and me class when I was 6 months old. And I don't think she really anticipated where that would go.
Thinking about growing up and watching your child step away from you and become independent, you're 12 years old, you're beginning to compete against swimmers who are significantly older than you are. And those are some really tender years of adolescence. You're growing taller, perhaps much taller than other girls your age. You're stronger than they are. You're starting to stand out a little bit. How did your parents come around you as you were starting to kind of break away from the pack in some ways during those really vulnerable years of growing up?
Yeah, they were so supportive. And I think they really helped me see that it was my body that allowed me to do what I loved in the sport while also validating the feelings of a 12 and 13-year-old girl. I've been 6 feet since I was 13. I'm now 6'2". I've had size 12 feet since I was that age too. So always been taller, always been muscular. And there were definitely times in those years where, you don't love the things that make you different. And so I was actually very thankful for my sport because that was one of the things where, although they were things that made me different, it did make it easier for me to understand that, oh, but I have a longer catch because I have longer arms and I can get my hand to the wall faster because I've got a bigger reach and I have a stronger kick because my feet are huge. And, I really began to appreciate my body for the things that it allowed me to do. And I'm so grateful to have had that experience on my own as well, because now looking at my 3-year-old, she is built very similar to me. She's so tall. She is so strong. And so I know that we're probably going to experience some of those similar things and she'll be on her own journey. But I feel very grateful that I'll be able to speak to it from a place of experience.
All of those conversations around body image are so important to have with adolescent girls. And you were having those kind of largely before social media became a really heavy influencer for girls. So when you think about your daughter and your own experience, what sort of lessons do you think are particularly important to transfer to her, knowing that she's going to be growing up in an environment where social media is telling her a lot of things about her body that are going to challenge not only a good and healthy sense of self, but perhaps her faith as well?
I think about this every single day, and it's something that absolutely terrifies me. But at the same time, I feel like God has given me so many tools to approach this in a way that I have confidence from experience, but also knowing that I don't have to have all the answers for those things. I can really lean on the Spirit to help guide me in those conversations. But I think one of the greatest things is when you watch the Olympics and you watch those different sports, every single body looks different. A swimming body looks different to a gymnastics body, looks different to an equestrian body, looks different to a shot putter body. And yet, these athletes are the best in the world at what they do. And so I think that's really what I want to exemplify for my daughter, is that you simply cannot tell by looking at a person how strong they are or how healthy they are or what their bodies are capable of doing. And so it's so much less about how your body looks versus how your body feels. And I always just want her to feel strong in her body and know that it will carry her through her life. And so far, she's just a force to be reckoned with. So I know if she keeps that attitude and personality, that she'll be able to overcome anything that life throws at her.
As you're preparing for London in 2012, your team is going through a pretty rigorous kind of monitoring to make sure that your behavior is above board. As all of that is developing for you as an emerging adult now, that sense of independence and autonomy, how did you experience that monitoring?
To be honest, I was grateful for it because I knew that it was helping keep our sport clean. And I love to explain it to people because I don't think they understand. But when you reach a certain world ranking, you are essentially, you have to fill out these, they're called whereabouts with USADA, where essentially they need to know where you are all of the time. And you need to have a 60-minute window every single day where you are where you say they are, where they can just spontaneously show up. They never tell you when they're coming. They've come on Thanksgiving morning for me. They've come before a red carpet. Like they will show up anytime and they can do either blood or urine. Obviously, we do it way more at competitions and things like that as well. You almost have to do it every single night when you're competing. As hard as it was, I also even understood from that young age, this is necessary. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help further our sport in the most clean way we possibly can.
What you're talking about here are all of these character qualities that we always talk about wanting sports to develop within us, right? Healthy body image, discipline, integrity, all of those things. It sounds like we're just part of the warp and woof of your growing up years because you had the privilege to be an Olympian. What is it like to be a Christian Olympian? Or do you not think of yourself as a Christian Olympian? Do you think of yourself as an Olympian who is a Christian?
I think of myself as a Christian before all else, and then whatever title follows. And I felt so supported, honestly. You know, we had Bible study throughout our Olympic training camp and our national team training camp. I felt like within the team, I had amazing resources and amazing people that their faith was incredibly important to them as well. So if any one of us needed prayer or support, like that was all there for me. I think it alleviated so much pressure. Because when I went out behind the blocks and knowing I was competing on the greatest stage in the world, I knew so many things were bigger than that. You know, like I knew I had been saved. I knew that I was loved. I knew that I had a father who wanted to know me intimately and be my friend. And like, when you put that all in perspective, it's like, I'm hopping in the pool to go swim. Like, yeah, like, yeah, that's definitely really cool. But like at the end of the day, like I think no matter if I go out and swim this race and swim exactly how I want to swim and accomplish all my dreams, or whether it's super disappointing and I'm really sad about how it went, at the end of the day, that's not going to make God love me any less. Mm-hmm. And so I would think about that, and I would think about my parents' love before I raced. And it just kind of gave me this sense of calm that I'm going to go out there and do my best. And at the end of the day, that's all I can do. And I know that they will be proud of me just being that person and then using the platform I get through that to hopefully shine his light and bring people to the cross.
And yet, those feelings, those assurances usually come to us somehow through the fire, right? We have them as presuppositions in our lives, but it's always at a time of testing, it seems, that they become real to us in a new way. Was there a moment in your Olympic career as you're growing up, as you're getting ready for the Olympics, perhaps even after the Olympics were over, where the rubber hit the road and those things that you had always sort of known theoretically, they came into a new reality for you where it was like, this is undeniable that these things are true about my parents' love, about God's love?
It's just the reality of elite athletics. Like it's not like a straight line up. You're going to have failures. You're going to have disappointments. So my second Olympic Games was incredibly disappointing for me. And then when I retired, that transition was so difficult, being retired at 23 years old with no job experience, but having gone to 2 Olympics, being a 6-time Olympic medalist. It's just like, you're left like, well, where on earth do I go from here? And then after Rio too, just having such disappointing swims. But I think when you're going through it, for me, what I struggle with so much with my faith is I ask the question, why? I try to figure out why these things are happening. And both of those times were so good for me to learn that I may not ever know the why. And sometimes we do. Like, I think sometimes with hindsight and with years and with healing, we can look back and be like, oh, yes, like that is why I went through that. This is what I learned. This is how I grew through it and took away something. But I think there's some things in life that are truly just so painful and so full of suffering. And so I think one of our greatest expressions of our faith is to go through those moments, and God knows we're going to ask why. He knows we're going to have the questions. But I think coming to a place of understanding of, I may not know the answer, but I know that He knows the answer.
Mhm.
And if I can just be safe and secure in Him understanding why this is happening and why I'm going through it, and with my pain through Him, there will be purpose, then I will make it through.
Yeah. Well, certainly life's trials change us, Olympic competition changes you, and motherhood changes you a lot. I'm sure that if I talked to you 4 years ago, you would be an entirely different Missy Franklin. What has motherhood done to change who you are at your core?
I've said yes to saying no. I have been like such a people pleaser my whole life. I've always wanted to be there and do things when people ask me. And I think for me, becoming a wife and then becoming a mother, my husband and my daughter are my number one priorities in the world. And if that means saying no to things so that I can prioritize them, it doesn't mean I'm saying no to everything. I'm still saying yes to things that I love and I'm passionate about and that fill me up so I can continue to fill them up. But I think, really understood the balance of being able to say no so that I can say yes to what truly matters.
Well, it's been 6 years since you've retired. You're a podcaster, you're a mom. Do you feel like you've settled in? Or is there something that's sort of like you could take the girl out of the Olympics, but you can't take the Olympics out of the girl?
There will always be the drive no matter what, but it doesn't always have to be new endeavors. I think it's just a drive that encourages me to continue being the best at what it is I'm doing every single day. I'm still super active. I mean, I worked out for 4 to 6 hours a day for the first, decade, 2 decades of my life. So God has just given me so many places that I can continue to just push and be the best version of myself. But I don't think life truly ever allows us to settle. But I do. I feel very settled. I feel very happy. I feel very fulfilled. And I feel like I'm living out my purpose. And I feel like that's where that sense of fulfillment comes from.
Well, you were an amazing example to girls as they grow and challenge themselves. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Bulletin. It's been great to talk to you, Missy.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation so much.
We will be right back. Talk to any Olympic athlete, and he or she will say, sports changed me. Through competition and training, we learn the disciplines of life and experience the development of Christian character. Failure and success provide ample opportunity to cultivate Christ-likeness. For some athletes, their experience in sport isn't just an important personal journey. It propels them into service to others. Such has been the case for Jimmy Mellado. A former decathlete in the 1988 Games in Seoul, Korea, Jimmy's experience in Korea not only shaped his heart, it charted what would become the course of a lifetime of ministry in the name of Jesus. Jimmy Mellado is the president and CEO of Compassion International, a nonprofit organization that serves vulnerable children around the world. Welcome, Jimmy, to the Bulletin.
Great to be with you, Clarissa.
So, Jimmy, you've got a really unique story in comparison to some of the other folks that we have heard from so far on the show today, because you were born in El Salvador. You were born outside of the United States. When did you come to the U.S., and how do you think being born outside of the U.S. shaped your experience as an athlete growing up?
Well, my mom grew up in poverty. She was the daughter of migrant farmers on the USA-Mexico border. And my father was son of a banker, more middle class. They were two adventuresome souls. They married and they moved all around the world. I went to 8 different schools before graduating high school, grew up in 26 different homes. But athletics was such an important part of my life. Usually when you move that much, life is very unstable for kids. But it wasn't for me. And that's because of my parents' faith in Jesus. But the complicating factor of always being the new kid on the block was, how do you make friends? And for me, athletics was a way for me to make friends pretty quickly. So, and to be noticed. As a Hispanic kid growing up in all these settings, my parents wanted me to learn English and my siblings. And so they sent us to American schools wherever we were. But every time I was in these American schools, they always thought I was like, if it was Nicaragua, they thought I was Nicaraguan. If we were in Bolivia, they thought I was Bolivian. And I'm culturally Mexican in heritage, but I technically wasn't an American citizen because my parents happened to be born in the United States, even though they were border families. So I always wanted to come to the United States. I wanted to be American. Because I wanted to be on the inside, and I always felt like I was on the outside looking in. And athletics was a way for me to be noticed, be respected in all these American systems. And it was second half of my junior year in high school that my dad thought, hey, you're doing pretty well in track. If we move to the United States, you might get noticed and get a scholarship. So it happened to coincide with a move that my father made professionally to move to Dallas, Texas. And then after my senior year there in high school in Texas, then I got a scholarship to run track at SMU in Dallas, Southern Methodist University.
In 1988, you're in Seoul. Seoul is making a strong push to be seen as a democratic force in the world stage, but North Korea and Cuba and a handful of other nations are boycotting the games. And we know that there is this quiet or not so quiet tension that often rumbles beneath the surface in the Olympics. As a person representing a birth nation with a history of conflict, having lived in countries that experience conflict, did you feel a burden or a responsibility of diplomacy when you stood on the track at the 88 Games?
I was a little boy in the middle of my third and fourth grade year in Nicaragua, and I watched the 1972 Olympics in Munich. And I was mesmerized by the Olympics. But the vision of the world coming together in peaceful competition, of course, was shattered with the abduction of the Israeli track team and coaches. And later on, 11 of them died. And it was just horrible. And they paused the Olympics for a day. But I sat through and was captivated by the drama of that. And that's when I just caught this vision of wanting to go to the Olympics and be a part of that kind of movement that sets aside differences for at least a couple of weeks and comes together in peaceful competition. And in 1987, my dad was still working in Latin America, was on a plane, and he sat next to the president of the Olympic Federation in El Salvador. And they start talking, and he says, these are my sons, Mark. Oh, he does track. And he goes, wait a minute, you said he was born in El Salvador. Yeah. Well, why didn't he compete for us? He said, well, he never thought about it. Here's his name and number. If you want to call him, feel free. So 2 years after I graduated college, I got a call from the Track Federation of El Salvador, inviting me to represent them in the Pan American Games in 1987. I got fourth place there, just missed the medal by one. And then that's when they said, Jimmy, would you like to train for the 88 Olympics? We're in the middle of a civil war. We only have money to send 6 athletes from all the sports. So even if you qualify, we can't promise you that you'll go. A committee will have to decide between the swimmer, the boxer, the cyclist, the track guy, whatever. But we'd like you to try. So I went back to SMU and my coach, even though I'd graduated, and I said, hey, can you help me? Can you coach me? And he said, come on back. They had a decathlete from Sweden that ended up playing ninth in Barcelona in the 92 games, didn't go in 88, but did go in 92. So he and I became training partners in preparation for the Olympics, and then went down to El Salvador, qualified literally in the middle of a war. The guerrillas had bombed a substation. There was no power in the city. On my way to try to qualify for the Olympics, there was traffic and gridlock, and I thought I wasn't even going to get there in time. I did barely qualify. And then it was just holding my breath to see if their committee would select me among all the other athletes. And thankfully they did. And I was one of the 6 athletes, the only male track and field athlete that went to Seoul, Korea to compete in the 88 Olympics decathlon.
Wow.
And it was what you said, the world coming together peacefully, setting our differences aside, if for just 2.5 weeks in peaceful competition and not let our differences divide us.
I feel like we can't talk about the 88 Olympics and track and field without talking about Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis. Ben Johnson, somebody who has so much potential. He tests positive for steroids in '88, and Carl Lewis receives the gold medal, upholding his '84 Olympic title in his stead. Talk to me a little bit about this dark side of Olympic competition. You're at the top of your game, and even if you trust in Jesus, the temptations to cut corners, to try to do this in your own strength have got to be really, really tremendous.
Really huge. And I had been around athletes that had been using steroids. That was kind of fairly normal at that time. And I was the second shortest of all the 42 athletes that qualified in the decathlon. So I'm only 5'8". I'm giving up 3 to 4 inches and 30 to 40 pounds to the average decathlete. The guy that won it was 6'7" and 210 pounds. I'm 5'8" and 165. So I was already giving up an enormous amount of physical attributes. And on top of that, I heard that 70% of the athletes I was going to compete against were actually juicing up on steroids. And I remember thinking, I wonder how good I could have been if I would have used steroids. Maybe that could have made up some difference. And then I just remember feeling this terrible sense of just thinking about cheating with steroids just was haunting to me. My athletics was an expression of my faith and walk with Christ. If I tried to use man-made ways to win, it would have gutted my motivation. I actually think I would not have done as well because in my mind, it would not have been filled with integrity. And integrity was significantly important to me in every expression of my life, including athletics. I couldn't. So at that point, it's like the outcomes are in God's hands. The journey along the way is in God's hands. And I never prayed to win. I just prayed that the Lord would allow me to bring my best. I always thought God was more interested in the inner victories than the outer victories.
Looking at your life, initially, one might say, how did an Olympic decathlete become the president of a major humanitarian organization? And yet, as we listen to you, it just makes so much sense. This little boy who uses sports as a calling card for identity, who has a global childhood, a deep faith in Christ, loves to run. After the Olympics, you pursue a life of Christian service and it just sort of makes sense. Do you feel like those same things that fueled you as you stood at the starting blocks fuel you today?
The Lord gave me a childhood dream to go to the Olympics, but I went there for an athletic experience of a lifetime. I came home with a calling to serve the church. I went to South Korea, and the pastor of the world's largest church, Pastor Paul Yoongi Cho back then, goes to the Olympic Village, and he offers up a prayer meeting for any athlete that wants prayer. I said, well, I'm not going to take steroids, but I'll take prayers. So I go to the prayer meeting. There's about 100 athletes there. Madeline Manning Mims, former gold medalist for the United States, was there, gave her testimony, and he prayed over us. And then he invited us to come to his church. And we were there, 2.5 weeks there. And so my wife and I went to that church that next Sunday and experienced a service that was so moving in a room with 25,000 other Koreans in the same auditorium. And then I heard they had 17 other locations, closed circuit TV. This is 1988, before streaming and internet and all that. And these other congregations, all together, they were about 500,000 people. And then they invited us to the seminar that was going to talk about the history of the church revival in South Korea. And I spent the rest of that afternoon learning about how Christ came to Korea before it was split into two. In the early 1900s, 1904, there was a real movement of Christ actually in North Korea. And then with the war and everything, it kind of moved to South Korea. And in South Korea, that's where there was this special movement of the Spirit, of folks praying continuously. And that is the era right after the Korean War was finalized, when Compassion was created, World Vision was created in South Korea there. That's where those two ministries had their start. But to see the church revival after the Korean War was settled, where they went from a handful percentage of Christ followers to over 25% Christ followers in that one country in practically a generation. It was almost like you were reading Acts 2, but you were watching Acts 2 in real time there in South Korea. And I remember being flooded by this sense of, oh Lord, be a part of what you're doing in this world, to be a part of your church, to serve the kingdom of heaven come to earth with my life. That's what I want to do with my life, no matter where my paycheck comes from. So I went for an amazing athletic experience, and I did. My highlight for me was, beating the world record holder in the high jump and 2 other events and winning my group as the shortest guy, winning my group in the high jump. But that pales in comparison to the passion and the energy and the enthusiasm that you feel when you've been called by God to do something that will completely change your life. And it has changed my life.
I can't help but think of that verse, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Jimmy. Listeners, we've all been given a race to run. As you cheer on your favorite athletes in the coming weeks and watch the Olympics on TV, remember your calling to a crown of glory that won't ever fade away. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. The Bulletin is a production of Christianity Today. It's produced and moderated by Clarissa Mall. The associate producer is Leslie Thompson. This episode was mixed by Kevin Morris, theme music by Dan Phelps. Eric Petrick and Mike Cosper are the executive producers of CT Media Podcasts, and Matt Stevens is our senior producer. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening.